Welcome to Flowcast. Today we welcome Sister Kristin Crawford and Associate John Malanchak, who are ready to talk with us about how gardening has transformed their lives. I'm Sister Beth Murphy, and today I have the privilege of bringing together two people who've not met before, but who have so much in common. John Malanchak, a Springfield Dominican Associate since 2017, has long volunteered at St. Dominic Hospital in Jackson, Mississippi. In fact, St. Dominic was the site of a spiritual awakening for John that led him down the path of gardening with a purpose. Sister Kristin, always in tune with God's earth and God's creatures, is finding new joys and challenges as she learns about permaculture, the science and beauty of working with earth to bring about its regeneration. Sister Kristin lives at Jubilee Farm in Springfield, where she is learning this new art. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First, I want to dig into the stories that brought John and Sister Kristin here. John, would you start by sharing what happened to you that day at St. Dominic and how it's transformed your life?
I'd be glad to. I love to share this story with people. As a volunteer, I was assigned to a portion of St. Dominic's Hospital called the Medical Mall. And the Medical Mall has a deli in it and cups, coffee, so forth. One day I heard this screaming in the hall, and as a volunteer, we're taught if something is wrong like that, please call security. And I figured, I need to call security because somebody's either getting beat up or whatever. As I approached where the noise was coming from, I noticed that the crowd of people started separating, just like you would see Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments at the Red Sea. Uh, as I looked, I saw a woman pushing a young man, probably in the early 20s, down the hall, and the husband was, I assume the husband was walking directly behind her sheepishly. And the woman was just tearing this boy up. He was about 22 years old, carrot top, Down syndrome. And I thought to myself, ma'am, don't you know that that boy has Down syndrome? You need to back off a little bit. Well, they got closer and closer. Now, I have to preface this by saying, all my life, I had an aversion, a strong, strong aversion to working or getting even close to those with either a physical disability or a mental or both. The reason being is I got closer to help them, my chest started hurting. I didn't know what to do, and I just backed off. And I used all my life, I used my chest hurts as an excuse. Well, they got close enough to the doors where I was standing, these big glass doors, and with electronic eye motion sensors. And God said to me, say goodbye to the boy. I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to get involved. I said, God, I will drop a pencil. I will get on my cell phone, look like I'm talking, but I'm not going to say goodbye. As they got closer, the actual door started to open up. Nobody could go out or in because the boy stops the wheelchair. And I said, goodbye. Just like that. I could have cared less. Just leave. I don't want to get involved. Well, the boy stops the wheelchair, as I mentioned, and he turns to me and he looks at me and he says, goodbye. So I knew he heard me, and I'm thinking, okay, you can leave now, but he has the wheels locked and the mother's trying to get out. Nobody could come in, nobody could go out. Finally, he lets go and goes outside. I can hear the mother yelling at the boy as they go out about 40 feet to a curb where valet's going to bring their car. God said to me, go stand with the family. I said, oh, hell no. That's a Southern phrase. So here I am telling God, oh, hell no, I'm not doing that. But I said, I'll tell you what, God, my job is to get that wheelchair. And I said, I'll go out there and get it once they leave. So I said, okay, I tell you what, God, I'm going to go outside, but I'm not standing near the family. I'm going to stand as far away as I possibly could. So I went out there and valet brings the car. So I start making my way up through this crowd to get to that wheelchair. The boy gets out, gets in the front seat. He has his back to the window, though. He's turned around and his mother's just chewing him out. She's sitting in the back seat. I can hear her with the door shut. I grabbed the wheelchair, and as I turned, I looked up, and there was the father staring at me over the roof of the car. I thought, uh-oh. I don't know if you all know Sister Dorothea from St. Dominic's Hospital, but I figured he's going to report me to Sister Dorothea. The way I acted, the way I spoke to his son. As I grab the wheelchair and I'm looking and he's not saying anything, I think, okay, maybe I dodged a bullet here. And I said, Sir, is there anything wrong? Giving him an opportunity now to say exactly what he felt. In a broken voice, it's just like everybody else out there quit talking. In a broken voice, the man looked at me and very slowly said, I want to thank you for speaking to my son. Well, at this moment, there wasn't a breeze anywhere. This breeze, like you see in the movie, just went straight through me. And I realized that the kid is just a kid. That's all. He may have one extra set of chromosomes somewhere, and I said, so what? The father needed to hear that. And at that moment, when I said he's just a kid, the aversion went away. So I grabbed the wheelchair and walked inside, and I said, now I got to talk to the boss man. I said, God, I am so sorry. But the lesson there was to listen to what God's saying. He has a plan for you. I think it's in the book of Jeremiah. It says He has a plan for you. And of course, I resisted the whole time. Now, you can tell when I've been gardening with somebody with disability, you'll see the potting mix going down my arm in a line. And that's where somebody drooled on me, but it doesn't bother me. So, and that's my story. That was an awakening. Unbelievable.
That is such a powerful story, John. Thank you for giving it to us, and for sharing it with our listeners. I think we are all in a place of continuing transformation in our lives. And though perhaps this transformation that Sister Kristin is going through might be less dramatic than what you experienced, I think she's going through one right now as well. So I want to ask Sister Kristin to share the story of her adventures in permaculture. I'm wondering how it happens that she finds herself on this new path in life, and what she's discovering about herself and about Earth as she works. So, Kristin, would you mind?
I need to kind of approach it sideways, and most people who know me realize that's how I usually operate. I basically believe that there are two major premises to life, and those are nothing we love is ever lost, and we call to ourselves any of the lessons we really need to learn. And I guess that's really been the whole story of all three of the ministries in which I've been engaged over the last, 45 years. I guess it's impossible. The first part of my ministry was spent teaching, and primarily I worked with junior high and high school people and taught science and history. The second part was spent rekindling an old love, which was medicine. I'd kind of hoped to go into medicine, but then entered the convent as a dumb young nun and never had that opportunity. So the second third of my ministry was spent working as a clinical laboratory scientist, first with the Indian Health Services and then with cancer care patients. And it was from that latter ministry that I was called to yet a third experience, one that I never really expected. And that was living out at Jubilee Farm and falling in love with permaculture, which frankly I had never heard of. I think permaculture really is, it's very hard for me to put into words because it's such a profound experience. It's a way of recapturing what our ancestors intuitively knew when they learned how to work with Earth to cooperate in bringing forth the things that everybody needed, whether that was the birds or other plants or themselves. It's a way of really learning to listen and observe and become more than you are as just an individual. And for me, the experience of permaculture has been the realization that we are just a part of a web of life that is so extensive and so miraculous. Um, when we feel overwhelmed and frustrated and kind of lonely because we think we're the only species capable of thinking and loving and cooperating with others, Earth teaches us that's not true and that God is present to all of us everywhere. So, that in a nutshell is what I'm learning in permaculture. Um, how I actually got there is something of a miracle in itself because, as I said, I never even knew what permaculture was. And landing at Jubilee Farm, Sister Rose Marie, who had been the director at Jubilee Farm at that time, had gotten a grant from Faith in Place, which is a stupendous organization that allowed the sisters there to study permaculture through Midwest Permaculture. And that is a program set up by Bill and Becky Wilson right here in Illinois, in Stell, Illinois. And their whole premise is that Earth calls us to be students. And their love of all of things nature came through so strongly in that course. And we're trying to put into action what we're learning.
John and Sister Kristin were just sharing the stories about how they have been transformed by their experience with God's creatures, whether human or earthly. I guess we're all earthly, are we not? We're all made of earth. But what I'd like to ask you now is, and either of you can answer, or you might want to reflect on the other's story. But why do you think it is so transformational when we put ourselves in intimate communion with one another and with Earth?
Go ahead, Kristin.
I was waiting for you, John. I think for myself, anyway, um, I've just known so many people who have felt adrift and alone and overwhelmed by so many things. I mean, we're bombarded by electronics and bad news and a real feeling of almost hopelessness. And for me, being able to actually just slow down and watch Earth working despite us, and knowing that we can contribute, but we don't have to control and we shouldn't control. Um, it's made me realize that part of our loneliness is assuming that we have to be in charge and we have to be the rulers of everything and solve all the problems. And in many ways, if we just learn how to work together, and even with other than human togethers, it comes out so much better. And for me, that's a real healing thing. And I think it would be a strong and healing experience for everybody, especially, I think, in the United States when we're so privileged and we think that vegetables grow in the grocery store and that meat does not come from animals that live as we live. Knowing our connections in that whole web makes everything more precious and more positive.
Well, Sister Kristen, you mentioned something about in our society, sometimes, people will feel alone. And while you were saying that, I was looking at myself and thinking that if you listen to the news, you are alone because I don't belong to that group of people. I don't belong to that group of people as far as, ideas and ideologies. But I have several degrees in geology and soil science, and I love getting dirty. And I've been planting, growing things since I was 2 years old with my grandfather from Russia. And of course, he never spoke a word of English. So he would kind of point and I would try to do what I thought he meant. But the soil, you know, as a scientist, if 1 tablespoon of soil contains approximately 50 billion microorganisms. I'm talking 1 tablespoon. That's quite a bit. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the soil that goes back to this permaculture. You don't want to use a lot of pesticides, whether it's a herbicide or insecticide or fungicide, because that impacts, it basically kills a lot of the microorganisms. Um, the those individuals that I garden with, those with intellectual and developmental disabilities, those that were, trauma due to an accident, brain trauma, so forth, post-traumatic stress disorder. I garden with the Vietnam veterans at a VA hospital here in Jackson. Just to see the change in their demeanor. Of course, if they watch the news, they're all depressed like everybody else. But when we garden together, and start getting our hands in the soil, they change. And I see this, and they become childlike. Those with those with memory care issues, the dementia at St. Catherine's Village, which is part of St. Dominic's system, they become childlike again. And of course, I'm also doing floral designs. I went through the Mississippi State University floral designer program, which was very intense. And I was telling the Vietnam veterans we're going to do floral design. And of course, these people they've seen hell and, you know, people, dead, burning. uh, And here we are talking about we're going to do floral arrangements. And they're so excited. Again, they become childlike. And one of the things I want to talk about that I learned in floral design is a term called wabi sabi, WABI hyphen SABI. And it came about, it's a way of life for the Japanese. It came through from little parts of Buddhism, little parts of Taoism as a Chinese religious belief. And basically, what they're saying is finding beauty in imperfection. Oh my God, if we could do that as adults and just say, you may not look like me because you have Down syndrome, but I find beauty in that person. And again, it goes back to that incident at St. Dominic's. I would never try to find the beauty in a person who has a developmental disability, an intellectual disability. Now I just see the beauty. And to watch those kids, whether they're 2 years old on up to 99 years old, to get dirty, they have the best time of their life. It's like you go into Mr. Rogers' neighborhood and you forget about everything else. But when you're alone, you hear God's voice, be still and know that I am God. And you're out there gardening and be 15 ladies out there just a cackling, and I won't hear a word. Um, so it's really beautiful. Gardening is just so calming.
I'm wondering, Kristen, if you have any experience at the farm in showing others the permaculture project and what they think about it, or your own experience. John talked about the difference. You talked about loneliness in our society, and John
Mhm,
talked about being alone as a very different experience.
mhm, mhm.
So I'm wondering if you have any insight to share there about the difference between loneliness and aloneness and how you experience that at the farm.
Okay. If I can go back to the first question that you had mentioned about others and their exposure to permaculture,
Mhm.
we have had such a positive and excited response. I know Sister Sharon gave a wonderful talk, a brief talk, along with Sister Rosemary, when we had the garden club from Springfield meeting out at Jubilee Farm. And when they mentioned that we were beginning to use permaculture or beginning to experience it at Jubilee Farm, they were so excited. They were just thrilled and wanted to know if they could come back and see it and volunteer and so forth. And virtually every group since, whether they were the Girl Scouts or adult groups, have wanted to tour the perma garden. um, the high school preachers came out not that long ago, and their ecology groups were thrilled with it and wanted to know how they could apply the principles themselves. And yeah, they're just very excited. And I think one of the most thrilling things for me is the realization that you can garden anywhere. You can garden if you're trapped in an apartment. You can garden in your own backyard, or as you have experienced it in the community garden. There's so much that can be done with so little. And regarding the aloneness and being alone as opposed to lonely, um, I think the key difference for me is realizing that you're always, no puns intended, grounded when you're alone. If you're open to God, if you're open to observing what's really happening around you and how you are a part of that, I think the loneliness aspect is thinking that you do not have ties to anybody or anything in your immediate vicinity. Um, or feeling, like I said before, that you have to be in charge, because I don't think there's any greater loneliness than feeling that you have to be responsible or guilty for situations that you cannot control. And garden teaches you that you are not in control. You can help, you can contribute, you can learn, but by golly, you try to photosynthesize and you learn pretty quickly you're not in control.
How would you
So,
do that? Begin to
yeah,
photosynthesize
I'd
yourself?
like to learn to do that, but did that answer your questions?
I think it did. I think that's a beautiful response and very insightful. And we can move both your stories and John's from the garden to life very easily. Um, there may be, how many did you say, John? 50 billion microorganisms in a teaspoon of soil?
A tablespoon.
In a tablespoon. Oh, so a little more.
Yeah, 50
Um,
billion. I can't comprehend that. And that's the complexity of gardening, but yet if you look at it, it's everything is so simple. But Kristen is absolutely correct. You don't have control of what's going on. And when I was gardening with the 3 and 4 year olds at St. Dominic's Hospital, it was the daycare. One of the girls, I told everybody that, the marigolds are considered annuals and they will die within 1 year. That's what an annual is. And all the boys were punching the marigolds. And one little girl, her name was Amelia. She looked sad, and I went over and talked to her, and she whispered something. And actually got down on one knee. I said, Amelia, I can't hear you. And she whispered into my ear. She said, why do they have to die? And I said, Lord, you're going to have to engage the Holy Spirit because I have no clue what to say to her. But I told her that God put her in charge um, of flowers, and that flowers do die. But God picked you specifically to ask me that question so that I can respond to you. And when I started talking to her, she was okay with the marigold dying.
Hmm.
So you never know what people are going to say, and like you're not control the situation. You respond to things, and you see parables coming to life. You know, Jesus's parables in gardening. You see that coming to life every day.
Didn't we just have that reading of the sower who went out to sow the seed? Maybe it was last Sunday or the Sunday before. And
Yes.
the parable goes, so we're all familiar with it, but only in the last few years have I started thinking about that parable in a new way. So the sower goes out to sow, and some seed lands on rocky soil, and some lands among the thorns, some lands on a path, and then some of it lands in fertile soil. And I always, in my mind, way of thinking, well, the only seed that was worth it was the stuff that landed in the fertile ground. But recently I've realized, no, if it lands on the rocky soil, it's there for the birds to eat. Or on the path, let's say, it's there for the birds to eat. And if it lands among the thorns and it grows up and then gets choked, well, the deceased plant nourishes the soil. So I began to realize there is no such thing as waste. And Kristin, you said earlier on, we all belong. We are all a part of Earth's ecosystem.
That's right.
Kristin, what do you think is changing for you now that you've become a permaculture horticulturalist, if I could say? That's very different than your other positions. What do you find changing within yourself because of that?
I think a lot of the stress I've taken on in what some people would consider a more professional role has lessened a great deal. Um, I'm more content with realizing that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to realize you're learning and you're learning and you're learning. I'm becoming more patient with myself and hopefully then also with those I'm living with right now. you know, um, I think it's really the first time that I feel that what I believe really can be lived, not just something that you think, okay, yes, I'm being a good person, and maybe in the next life that will be made more real. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
Mm.
I'm actually seeing that it's possible to walk your talk, to be a person of integrity, and to be much more at home, realizing that this is Earth, this is the Eden that we have, this is our heaven, not someplace beyond or removed from Earth. We're not leaving here to go to someplace better. We're creating the better here. And for me, that's the greatest blessing that I've learned or am learning. I know I don't really have it all encapsulated. Um, but that's the greatest gift I think that certainly Jubilee Farm can offer anybody who comes. It's a place of healing, and we need so much healing in our world.
Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Would you just share a moment or two how people can get engaged at Jubilee Farm if they live near Springfield or happen to be visiting here?
Well, Jubilee Farm really is over 160 acres of wonderful land. I mean, you step onto it, and over people say it's, you feel it's a place of peace and welcoming. Most of the land is in its natural state. Um, I know the people who have been there before me have allowed it to return to prairie and wildflower. We have paths that comprise several miles worth of traveling through the woods and just observing nature. We have a labyrinth that people are welcome to come and walk. We have the permagarden, of course, where people are welcome to come and learn. We have a creative arts center that offers a variety of different kinds of experiences and programs. Sister Anita does magnificent weaving workshops and has individual students who are able to learn how to weave and spin and recover that part of creativity. And we have retreats, we have all sorts of things that are available. We have La Casa, which is a separate house that people can choose to come and make retreats, or folks have held meetings in our Creative Arts Center for groups. And there are just so many possibilities.
Yes, there are. I myself will be making my retreat with you in September, and I'm counting the days. Um, if you would like to know more about Jubilee Farm, you can visit their website, which is jubileefarm.info. And there you'll find a phone number too, and you can just call. So
Mhm.
whether you live nearby or are traveling through the area, know that you'd be welcome there. Um, John, I'd like to hear your last thoughts on our conversation. And if there's anything that you want to say about how people might get engaged in either volunteer gardening, as you do, or with volunteering at St. Dominic's or St. Catherine's Village, that would be perfectly fine.
Okay, as far as volunteering, um, if you wanted to volunteer at the hospital, we have a volunteer services group there, and just stop by and put your name in, and they'll welcome everybody. COVID really uh, reduced the number of volunteers, and a large majority did not come back because they had other things to do during COVID, and they just didn't want to go back. Um, if you wanted to volunteer with me, now understand that there are a lot of people out there that I know that are just like me that had this aversion. That they're very compassionate people, but just don't want to, I guess, get involved to a point where they'll feel this terrible feeling inside them. And I tell people now that don't let your compassion for someone interfere with your passion for that same person. And because if you're compassionate, you will not allow that other person to grow because you're constantly taking care of them and not pushing them uh, physically and mentally. I have a little child in me that I call Dominic. And people said, "You named him after St. Dominic." I said, "No, I like the name Dominic." And the Dominic is the Holy Spirit. And I even asked God, I said, "Do you mind if I call you Dominic?" He said, "No, go right ahead." So I have a little ministry called Dominic's Garden. And basically, it's not one particular garden, it's many gardens, those with disabilities. But like St. Paul, you got to get up every day. And the little child wakes me up every day and said, "You got to get going." And wherever I garden, I find serenity in the person that I'm with. Um, I don't dumb down anything. I just teach differently that they understand. I will teach photosynthesis to a 6-year-old and get through, and they will have an understanding. I just don't get that technical. But you find out that we're all God's creatures, great and small, made after the image of God. So you look into their eyes and you'll see God. So that's my gardening story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you so very much for that, John. Before we sign off, here's an invitation from Sister Mary Joan Sorge Thanks, Sister Beth. Would you like to deepen your spiritual life and learn more about the Dominicans? A new class of Springfield Dominican Associates is forming now. Dominican Associate candidates learn about Dominican history, prayer, community life, and spirituality during a series of 9 monthly sessions. Associates who make commitment often say they enjoy the sense of community, purpose, and joy they discover in their new relationships with the Dominican sisters and other associates. To learn more, visit springfieldop.org/associates with an S, or call me today at 217-787-0481. Hope to hear from you soon. Thanks, Sister Joan. I hope that some of our listeners will follow up on your invitation. And thanks to our Flowcast listeners. Flowcast is a production of the Dominican Sisters of Springfield. You can visit flowcastlisten.org to find the resources we've mentioned. You can also subscribe there to receive every Flowcast episode in your email inbox. The Flow in Flowcast is an acronym for the life of the world, reminding us of our call to imitate Christ, who offered himself for the life of the world. And thanks to the Flowcast team, engineer and editor Brandon Durham, and marketing director Jean Ann Miller. I'm Sister Beth Murphy, looking forward to the next edition of Flowcast. So long.